Dear colleagues, welcome to the LGMA webinars hosted by ICLE. I will just give a couple of minutes for our colleagues to settle down in the system and then proceed shortly. Thanks for your patience. Okay, I think we can start without further delay. Welcome to the monthly LGMA webinars towards COP28. My name is Yunus Arakan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLE Local Governments for Sustainability. And we are delivering this in our capacity as the focal point of local governments and municipal authorities constituency to the UNFCCC. This is part of a series of webinars that ICLE is hosting in this preparatory process for the annual Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC. This is the first webinar of 2023. And for those who are joining us new, we just wanted to let you know that this is a session that is recorded and then it's made available on the ICLE's YouTube channel, but then also with the presentation as well. During the presentation, we time to time have our guests depending on the agenda. Today, I will be joined by my colleague Ingrid Kotze from ICLE Cities Biodiversity Center. We usually prefer to go through the webinar first. If there's any burning issue, you can type into the chat box or Q&A box, but we'd rather prefer to have it at the end of the presentation. This is also repeated every day when we have the sessions for the 10 a.m. European and African time zones. For those in the Eastern Hemisphere, and then for the 4 p.m. For the Western Hemisphere colleagues, in order to enable an interactive dialogue with all the partners. We would like to thank you very much once again for your attention, and I think it's better we can proceed. First of all, once again, who is LGMA? We are simply, in basic terms, the voice of the cities and regions in the UNFCCC process. It's the networks of local and regional governments in its broadest sense of the subnationals. This is a constituency that was created in '95, which means since the first COP, we're active in the UNFCCC process. And this process is primarily open for those organizations who have completed accreditation process to the UNFCCC. However, in order to be more inclusive, especially for those consultation meetings like webinars and exchange of emails, we are keeping it broader. And we of course follow the UNFCCC procedures, but we also want to share our process beyond those who follow the UNFCCC official registration processes. Therefore, a number of local and regional governments are also joining us. We know as of today we have around 50 partners accredited to the UNFCCC. What we do usually is first of all, this is a year-round process. We contribute in the negotiations. We provide our inputs by written or verbal statements in various sessions. We participate in the workshops so that we provide inputs to the negotiations, various agenda items. Those who are familiar with the climate process since Paris Agreement in 2021, there is a process called Climate Action Agenda, which is led by the high-level climate action champions and Marrakesh Partnership. This process is not a constituency-based process. There is a working group or thematic action pathway on human settlements, but we're not attending this as a constituency. Human settlements is a process by co-led by UNEP on the built environment agenda, and ICLA is leading the process on waste and consumption. This is also open for the participation of business and NGOs and other members of the society. And there are also other thematic pathways. But of course, majority of our partners are joining this, especially beyond the pathway. We also follow the Race to Zero, Race to Resilience agenda, and Breakthrough agenda as well. Next, we also follow the process that is led by the presidencies, which is changing every year. And every year, each presidency have their own priorities and styles of working. That is the biggest difference. In the UNFCCC, there is much more established process of who's doing what and how is the process. Whereas in the presidency dialogue, it's a bit more depending on the choices. Of course, we're very happy that most of the presidencies have been working with us in that sense as through the LGMA constituency, but we are always again respecting their choices. That's why it's a bit uh, mm, unique every year, let's say. Then we are also working with the nations who have been party to the UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement, those who support the multi-level action, the collaboration with local energy governments at home domestically, as well as at the global agenda. And this is also a process that we kicked off in 2000 since 2012. And obviously, this is also a bit loose group. There are countries whose choices can change depending on the governments who are in charge. There are some governments or nations who have been more friendly with the multi-level action time to time, and they can change. Therefore, we are also flexible on that. And the logic is that the decisions at the UNFCCC are adopted by parties, those diplomats or national government representatives, they sign the decision. So we try to work with those friendly nations so that they can defend or insert those positions that we would wish to see into the process. And that is the way decisions are adopted in the UNFCCC process. So let's proceed because in the sense, as we said, this is an agenda that is repeated every month, the webinars, because there is a need for consultations. So you can see the calendar here, and you can also register yourself to the 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. sessions, which is morning and afternoon sessions, in the LGMA agenda, citiesandregions.org, so that you can follow all these discussions and consultations. And in time, we always had this practice that we are invited champions, presidencies, partners, so that this is a practice that is more inclusive and interactive. Obviously, since this is the beginning of the year, we are still having some clarifications. We will go through the latest information on the calendar and the appointments in the presidencies. We're also aware there are some partners who are still warming up after end of the year break. So we thought this at this stage for this presentation, we'll keep it internally, but we'll have more to come later on as well in the coming sessions. With that regard, let's remember and the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we have continued our practice that in the Blue Zone, it is the multi-level action pavilion as our home, so that it is our base. This is the place where we had our daily briefings, or we had the largest agenda, but we will not restrict ourselves. We did not restrict ourselves only to the multi-level action pavilion, but we are proud of the partnership that we have created here. In particular, it's continued with the Scottish government as the host, but the presidency and the UNEP Secretariat, including the Egyptian Minister of Environment, Housing, and also the Marrakesh Partnership. But it's a broad diversity of stakeholders or networks of local governments as members of LGMA and even national governments to support the activities that we have been hosting in this pavilion. What we have seen, we had more than 500 representatives of local energy governments attending in person to the COP through either recognized or accredited by LGMA partners or their national governments or by the UN system. We have observed we had more than 150 political leaders like councillors, mayors, deputy mayors, or governors. At the workshops, at the sessions at the pavilion, we had more than 50 plus sessions, but across we are expecting that it could be around more than 200 sessions throughout the 2 weeks inside the UNFCCC. That could also be assigned or led by the LGMA partners. And we are grateful for all those partners who dedicated their time and energy to help us to secure this space, because having a pavilion in the blue zone is a huge challenge. It is costly. We have to pay for both the reservation of the space, but also it is equipment, it is online infrastructure, and we also want to make sure that we have also flexibilities and opportunities for those partners who can join us regardless of the cost, so that it is not restricted to those who pay, but it is a solidarity among those who can, so that others can also benefit. So we once again thank all the partners who have helped us to deliver this truthfully and successfully. Recapping what has happened in addition to the decisions and all the different outcomes, but if we have a bird's eye view, how we can interpret what has happened in Sharm el Sheikh. First of all, the one good news is that we were always saying that COP26 in Glasgow was the good because of that it kicked off the second phase of the Paris Agreement, but the climate emergency agenda was always missing there. And our hope that we will be complementing this. And we were very happy, especially with the conclusion of or kicking off the loss and damage fund or facility. We actually have addressed the climate justice in the climate space. The UN community has addressed this. So in that sense, we consider COP26 and COP27 as part of the same package, so that it is now finally delivering its goal, that it is the second phase is really starting. And we are saying that in this space now, rather than the negotiation, of course there will be a lot of details to be sorted out, but the real focus is that how we mobilize finance, how we manage this process between different actors, different governments, which is a governance issue, and it is a capacity building issue, especially for those who wish to deliver this as quickly as possible, like us, who should be also getting additional support in the implementation through the capacity building as well. What we are seeing as the essential thing that is coming up is that we have seen on the way to Sharm el Sheikh, during the Sharm el Sheikh, even afterwards, there are so many initiatives like Surge that we have been working on, but so many national and international initiatives, and so many agenda items in the UNFCCC have been addressing multi-level action or engagement of local learning environments, which gives us the confidence that this is the new normal, that multi-level action, which means engaging local energy governments, but as well as sustainable urbanization, are now an imperative in the second phase of the Paris Agreement. This is a huge point that we should never ignore and we should never forget. And that is, of course, making us even more ambitious and aggressive to be actively involved in this process. The thing that is also inevitable not to ignore is that the whole UNFCCC, especially in Sharm el Sheikh, the logistical challenges, the technical challenges, and political challenges of convening 50, 60,000 people in a 2 weeks time in a space which has not practiced before is becoming even more and more challenging. But also the way the actors, the stakeholders are engaged is also becoming obsolete, that we have to find new ways that is reflecting the spirit of the Paris Agreement, the multi-stakeholder approach, the multi-level approach. Therefore, we are fully aware that the current practice of the UNFCCC should be improved significantly so that we can be much more ambitious and much more innovative in engaging all our partners into this process, as well as the challenges between the nations. We have seen this into the debate in loss and damage. The traditional blocks of North and South has not been anymore valid. That was the power of how loss and damage was adopted, with the solidarity between Europe, small island states, but also major economies like, or bigger developing countries like Pakistan, so that those who were resisting, big countries, big parties like US and Russia and China, they were not able to stop this process. So the whole world is now really changing the way they're engaging in this process, and the UNFCCC now has to be prepared for that. This will be one of the biggest topics of the next couple of weeks and months and even years, to readjust the mechanisms, and we as LGMA should be actively involved in this debate, and we will touch upon this especially in the conflict of interest discussion as well. Those who have been following us, we have all the daily bulletins from the LGMA perspectives is available. You can track that, and you can also access to this in the citiesandregions.org COP27 webpage. We're of course delighted that one of our biggest achievement was the first ever climate and urbanization ministerial, and the Surge initiative, which is really receiving a very big interest. It's more than 50 now partners across the world from different society members from global north and south. We have seen parties like US, Japan, as well as the global south. We have seen a very fantastic, impressive presentation by the Dutch government, which was a model of how local national governments can work with their national governments. And we are aware that Surge was an important kickoff. It was one of those initiatives that was recognized in the action agenda from the COP27. There were so many initiatives announced, but one of very few of them were in the climate action agenda. We're aware our colleagues in UN Habitat and the COP27 presidency are busy in finalizing the minutes or the report of the meeting, and we're expecting that the next steps of the Surge will speed up, especially knowing that this year there will be the second UN Habitat Assembly, which is a brilliant opportunity because this assembly meets every 4 years, and the fact that it comes just after a fantastic engagement that is a symbol that urban and climate communities are getting together. We are expecting that the outcome from UN Habitat Assembly can also positively feed into the climate debate. The only concern we have is that the full week of UN Habitat Assembly will be overlapping with the UN Bonn Conference, which we will discuss in the agenda. But we have to do our best that we can turn this into an opportunity, especially with the way we will engage in the UN negotiators during the Deng cities and in Bonn, so that we will make sure that there is a very nice continuity of among the processes, so that they can complement each other. I have my colleague Ingrid, who has joined us. If you wish, because in the morning session, Ingrid, due to technical difficulties, she joined us at the end. But in fact, maybe this time we can prioritize Ingrid, because I also know she has some issues that she may have to leave early. This was a very basic summary of the headlines, but I know Ingrid has much more to share because she was leading our advocacy work, and we are very proud of the outcomes from the global biodiversity process. And thanks to leadership and efforts of Ingrid and many partners and individuals. Therefore, I suggest, Ingrid, I keep this slide open, and I think you can go verbally into details, and then we can follow up with other documents later on. So the floor is yours, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Yunus. And yes, it was a great and very strategically and historically important COP. I just want to recognize, before I start my sort of quick report back, the sort of thanks and the appreciation from ICLEI, specifically Cities Biodiversity Center, to all of the ICLEI regional offices and our World Secretariat, but also to our partners, Regions for the various subnational governments that we worked with, for example, the Scottish government, who had hosted the Edinburgh process, which led up to this COP, and where ICLEI played a key role. And then, of course, also the city of Montreal, which was the host city, and importantly, the province of Quebec, whose very generous support made the summit, but also our very first pavilion possible. So I just want to summarize. I think that the 3 points that you've got there are reflective, very well reflective of what was the major outcome from this very historic COP. And it was historic on a number of levels, not just because it was a very big COP. People talked about the Paris moment for biodiversity, and it was something that had been long in coming since 2018, delayed as a result of COVID. But it was also historic from the perspective of how the positioning of our constituency of local and subnational governments was really entrenched and solidified at the COP. So if we look at the first bullet on the slide, where we're talking about the the new framework, which we now call the Kunming-Montreal framework, which was adopted. It was quite a tense last couple of days of negotiations. I'm sure many of you watched the news and saw the tweets and things, but it was ultimately adopted in the final hours, and it came out as a package. So there's the framework with its 2030 targets, as well as a couple of decisions that were part of the sort of negotiation process that are very key and instrumental to implementation of the framework. So there's a decision around the monitoring framework for implementation, also mechanisms for planning, monitoring, review, and reporting. Very importantly, the one on resource mobilization. Another important one was around capacity building and the development of technical and scientific cooperation. The last one had to do with digital sequencing information, which is not relevant to our constituency, but the others are very much so. What I also just want to mention is that although there are several targets, and one specifically which you can see there, highlighted target 12, which speaks to sort of densely populated urban areas, and it's around green and blue, or access to green and blue spaces, but it goes much wider than that. It talks about sustainable use. It talks about connection with human health and well-being. It talks about the planning aspect. There's several other of the targets where, for example, target 14, where there's a specific reference also to all levels of government in the target. But then many others, for example, there's targets around consumption and production patterns. There's a target around pollution, and even the very sort of well-publicized 30 by 30 targets for conservation and protection and ecosystem restoration, where local and subnational governments will play a very important role. And one of the things, the sort of important messages that I took from the COP is that there's a real recognition and appreciation that a lot of the implementation and the ability to achieve these targets is going to stand or fall to the extent in which we're able to mobilize at the country level, mobilize the already real contributions that are being made by cities and states and provinces. So that, I think, is important. And that's linked also to the second big thing that came out of that COP, was the decision, dedicated decision, the second one, a 10-year action plan or plan of action for engagement of subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities to ensure the enhanced implementation of the framework. And in the plan of action, it speaks very specifically to things like resource mobilization, capacity building, planning, reporting, and importantly, it embeds and recognizes the cities with nature and regions with nature platforms as being the platforms where the subnational levels of government will report on and monitor against their contributions to meeting these targets. So I think that one should not underestimate that. And I think that the thing that's going to be really important going forward now, and we have less than 10 years in this decade, we've got 7 years, is the extent to which we as a group of network organizations representing the local government constituency can mobilize our members and ensure that there is real tangible implementation on the one hand, but also feeding into the NBSAP, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, and the reporting mechanisms on the other hand. And linked to that is, of course, always the question of having significant and sufficient resources to ensure that there's increased investment in nature at the subnational level. Whether it's through new financial instruments or whether it's through increased mechanisms and increased grants and private sector. These are all important things, and it's also important to know that one of the things that was launched at our COP was a call from several mayors for increased investment. This is something which ICLEI was part of it was coordinated through UNEP, Other partners that were involved were, for example, C40 and several others, where there's a very dedicated call, and it includes four calls. There's a call to extend the financial mechanisms at the national level, but there's also a call to the private sector to increase investment in nature and nature-based solutions, as well as to the financial institutions, and then generally the sort of the stakeholder groups. So resource mobilization, as in the climate space, is going to be something that's increasingly important, and I also think it's something where our constituency needs to really stand up and push for a lot more investment. I think the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that if we look at the impact of the summit and the first pavilion, which is in your last bullet there, we had a more than 1,500 registered and participating delegates at this summit. We were very privileged to be able to be given a space in we had the main plenary room, the party's main plenary room, where our summit was held. There were other summits, they did not get this level of privilege. Ours was the only one that was held there. It was a very big room, and we filled that space. It also meant that because it was in the main sort of concourse, we had, although it was the sort of break, the session break time, and the dates that it was held, our summit was held, we had a lot of walk-ins from parties. And it's not just one or two, there were really a really good representation from parties. So in that sense, it allowed for real engagement between mayors and governors and leaders from our constituency with parties. Also, just to mention that of these local and subnational members, we had more than 200 there. And this was, governors, it was mayors, it was secretaries. I mean, we had the deputy mayor from Paris, we had Secretary Crowfoot from California, people of that caliber, but we also had a very good representation from all over the world. The mayor of Kunming was there, the mayor of Montreal. So I think it's at this scale, it really made the party sit up and take note. And a lot of the sort of passage talk was, you could see there was a real understanding that the value and the importance of the contribution of cities and subnational governments at the COP, through how they influence the negotiation process, but specifically also as allies and integral to the whole of government approach in terms of implementing the new framework. More than 300 cities and regions around the world were represented there from 70 odd countries around the world. In terms of NGOs and global and regional and subnational institutions and organizations, there were more than 350 represented. And if we look at our speaker list, it was a list of 80 plus, and we had some amazing speakers there, and I would really encourage you to go and have a look at our program. The pavilion was a first one, as Eunice mentioned, and I want to really again recognize the contribution of Quebec. They really made sure that we had a very special space. It was incredibly full and active and lively. We had a Montreal Day, a China Day, a Quebec Day, and then we had thematic days. We had issues around mainstreaming. We talked about the other conventions, Ramsar, Convention on Migratory Species. We talked about planning. There was a session specifically with the UN Habitat. And there was an agriculture session, lots of sessions. And what was so interesting to me was that, in speaking to people coming to these sessions at our summit, many of them were from the parties. And one particular case which sort of stands up in my mind was one of the delegates from Venezuela, who had a very small delegation, and they had, as a delegation, decided that because they're so small, they can't really participate in all these other events, but they focus specifically on our pavilion, which again is an indication of the understanding from the parties of how important it is to involve and to recognize subnational and city contributions. We had a lot of launches, things like the Berlin Urban Nature Pact. I've talked about the call for mayors for increased finance. We had the Kunming Center of Excellence. We had an amazing event at the summit around cities with nature and regions with nature. There were 35 new cities that joined around at the COP, 8 new regions, including California, for example, and 5 new partners. And 2 of these are really significant. For example, the World Health Organization and the Convention on Migratory Species. So, and really just to sum up, to say that as one of the contacts at the Secretariat of the Convention mentioned in a call yesterday, that the summit and the pavilion was a quantum leap in terms of profiling and showing what our constituency is doing and is committing to do. And there's no going back. You know, going forward at our next COP, which is going to be held in 2 years' time in Turkey, this is the bar that we've set. It's a very high bar, and there definitely will be an expectation and the space. We're in the room. There's no more question about it. We're a very important major group in the room in the Biodiversity Convention. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions if there are.
Thank you, Ingrid, and once again, congratulations. It's really, really so encouraging and motivating. And of course, as the Paris Agreement second phase has started, the biodiversity has advanced for this 2030 framework. I think it's time now for convergence, and this year especially, we will see in the calendar there will be a lot of opportunities to ensure some synergies. And as you have mentioned, there is also a lot of practices in the biodiversity convention negotiations which doesn't apply into the UNFCCC, and that I think we could also encourage the UNFCCC Secretariat and the parties to be inspired, even though we know the scale. I mean, the numbers are like tenfold in terms of the size of capacities, but I think we should still really make a better use of the opportunities that our participants, stakeholders have interactions with the parties in the biodiversity space as a model for the negotiations and convention on climate as well. So I don't see immediate hands raised, but let's continue, and we could come back to, of course, in the discussion. But let's proceed because we have 10 more minutes at least, and then we can have a dialogue if possible. So next ones, we will spend more time in terms of what is now the engagement that is expected in the next year or this year, and what is the timeline for that. So once again, the COP process is an is an annual cyclic process. Of course, the challenge is that this is a process that is first defined by the regions. It travels from one region to the other region, and in the UNFCCC jargon, the regions are Asia Pacific, outside Japan and Australia and New Zealand, because they are in the Western Europe group, then Africa, then Latin America, Europe, and Central and Eastern Europe. These are the regions of the UNFCCC negotiations. Here in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt was hosting on behalf of Africa. So we have seen there was the COP president from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Shukri, Excellency, and there was a champion, climate action champion, Mahmoud Mahir-Eldin. So these are the two individuals that are officially recognized under the UNFCCC. What the Egyptian government made additional is that they have appointed Environment Minister of Egypt, which was the person who was traditionally following the climate negotiations as well. But in the COP process, the COP presidency, she played a role that is mainly for the domestic purposes. and she had been involved in the negotiations, but the real responsibility was on the hands of Mahmoud Mahieldin and Minister of Foreign Affairs. During the couple of months that we have engaged with the presidency, we have been also working with Ambassador Ayman, who was leading many of the initiatives, including Surge. So this was a unique model, as we have said. This was not necessarily the case in the previous COPs, but this is what has happened in the Egyptian presidency. Now, coming to the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, which was announced last week, the official counterparts in the UNFCCC process, that is the one that is the COP president designate, who will be the one who will lead the negotiations, and the action champion, who would be the action agenda coordinator. So and let's remember, Arab Emirates is keeping this position on behalf of Asia Pacific. So geographically, they're very close to each other. Egypt, you can say Gulf or Middle East, various terminologies can be used, but actually it is on behalf of Africa and then Asia Pacific. And now we have a new leader, which is His Excellency Ahmed Al-Jabbar. He's the Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology of Emirates, and he's been very well recognized and well known in the climate community because he has been the special envoy for years and years, and he has a number of hats, including, for example, the CEO of Masdar City, which is a flagship initiative of Emirates. But most importantly, he's also the CEO of the National Oil and Gas Company of United Arab Emirates. When the Emirates government announced his position, he was announced as being the first CEO of a company, national company, as a president designate. But more importantly, the company he's leading is also very unique, and it is subject to different discussions and even controversies, because this is the National Oil and Gas Company, which of course is one of the biggest debates of the whole climate debate, which is the conflict of interest. There has been a huge discussion even in that COP27, and now him being the leader of a national gas and oil company is of course creating concerns and frustrations among many stakeholders. And there had been calls that at least during this presidency term he should step down, and so far there has not been any response on that. But this is the situation at the moment, and we as LGMA constituency, we should also get together and come up with some ideas on how we will react or handle this process. We have been already in touch with the presidency's teams dealing with the stakeholders. They are already opened doors for us, and we will keep in our dialogues. But obviously, this situation is a serious concern also for ICLE, but I assume many of the LGMA constituency members are also sharing this concern, and we have to find an appropriate way to reflect this, because once again, we do not have any concern in his individual skills and vision and driving the low carbon transformation in his country, but being officially seated in the CEO of a national oil and gas company in its entirety has a huge contradiction with the spirit of the outcomes of the conflict of the COP process. So this is one thing that we have to be discussing in the next couple of days, weeks, and months, maybe. We have heard Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, who's the current president of IUCN, is the climate action champion. She is also well known in the space, and we are more than happy to welcome her. The Emirates, when they announced their leadership, they also have announced the first time ever the youth climate action champion, a youth climate champion, Her Excellency Shama Al Mazri, which is announced for the first time under the COP presidency leadership, as well as Minister of Environment of Emirates, Her Excellency Mariam Al Meri, who will be leading the NDC and the domestic commitments of the Emirates, especially 2050 targets, similar to the role that Minister of Environment of Egypt, Her Excellency Yasmin Fuad, has played. So there are some similarities between these two COP presidencies. And of course, for us, one of the big question marks would be how the COP28 presidency will follow up on the initiative of the surge that we have built together with COP27 presidency, because there were expectations that there will be a continuity and follow-up. As of today, we don't know this, but we look forward to a good working relation between these two presidencies, because there was this ministerial urbanization with the commitment to repeat. And we also know the Emirates as a country is also very much open to the idea of decentralized cooperation or multi-level action, because it's also a federal government in its obvious, let's say, bird's eye view, symbolic model of governance domestically. So these are the things we will follow up. These are the actors we will continue to stay in touch. Here, the calendar is we have touched upon it in the last webinar in December, but here we have more concrete dates and calendar. We have 4 major tracks. One is the UNFCCC agenda. Then we have another UN agenda. We have several agendas outside the UN process led by global partners or national governments, and we have LGMA agenda. If we highlight each of them, let's focus on the UNFCCC. Of course, every year there is submission deadlines. This year, February, mid-February, 6th of March for global Stocktake, and others will come on board. And in each of the deadline, there's a specific theme, and we have practiced that each of our members or partners were leading some of the agendas, and we have to come together again and to decide who to lead on this drafting of these processes. Obviously, we have the June session in Bonn, which is called Subsidiary Body 58 session. This year, it will also be overlapping with the UN Habitat Assembly. That will be the biggest challenge, but we have also scheduled the daring cities for the second week, so that we can make sure there is a good synergy in terms of our relation with the negotiators. This year, one of the biggest subject will be the process for stakeholder engagement, which is particularly very challenging with this conflict of interest agenda. And of course, during the year, there will be numerous workshops that will be, the LGMA members will be invited so that we can intervene. In the other UN agenda, last year was a bit more hectic because there were a number of COPs who were postponed and overlapped significantly. Okay, I see, by the way, Felix, you have noted that chat is not available, and you have put in your questions in the Q&A box, or in particular with the COP28 presidency. Yes, and that's exactly. I mean, maybe we can open the floor when we close the session so that you can intervene. But Felix, definitely, we have said that the current president-designate has a number of descriptions of his leadership. It's being a minister and being the CEO of ADNOC is not just the only qualifications he has. And of course, he has been leading his decarbonization of his country. That's why it's a very interesting experience that we will all have. And of course, with Hannah, as the chief negotiator, we are also in touch with her, and he has also introduced us to the stakeholder engagement team. So we will also follow up with that. The MENA Climate Week, let's come to that. And it's good that maybe at this point, Andrew, you have mentioned, usually at this time of the year, we were more or less clear about the regional climate week's dates. But this year in 2023, as of today, none of the regional climate week dates nor hosts have been announced yet. Maybe you're aware today and this week there's this Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week taking place, as well as at the same time Davos meetings of the World Economic Forum is also taking place. It may be possible that there will be possibly some announcements that may come. I see you shared the link. I haven't seen that, but we can have a look at it. I'm expecting, because I know UNFCCC Secretariat is already visiting Dubai. So let's be prepared that there may be announcements soon to come. So let's be alerted. And it's good that we have additional intelligence in advance. So thanks for sharing this, Andrew, as well. In the UN agenda, as I said, the big agenda is primarily the water conference in March. We will have, as we said, Habitat Assembly, which will be particularly unique for the urban community. This year is heavy on the HLPF review of several SDGs, including 11, and SDG Summit taking place, as well as the Climate Action Summit of the Secretary General will happen as a way to prepare for the global Stocktake. But of course, these are outside the UNFCCC practices. We also have a process like plastics treaty negotiations. Or of course, the UNFCCC agenda will be particularly focusing on global stocktake, but we will come to that again. Outside the UN, we have seen increased initiatives from national governments and partners, especially, for example, with the G7 and G20, we are particularly very strong. Urban 7 Mayors Summit will be, I mean, this is the LGMA agenda, but we will start in Japan with a number of events, including Zero Carbon National Forum, Zero Carbon City Forum, G7 Climate Ministerial in April, and G7 Urbanization in July. Meanwhile, G20 will also be convened during the year in July, but G20 doesn't have an urbanization ministerial. We have to be aware of it. This year, there will be a very unique experience from the United States. The government of United States, the federal government, State Department, but other departments as well, will be convening the first ever cities Summit of Americas in Denver in July, in April, which will be immediately after the Earth Day. So it will be unique because, as I said, the topic is cities, but it is beyond climate, and it's not led by us as the networks. It is the networks who are participating in the design, but it's not us who are driving it. So that's a unique model as well. In terms of the LGMA-led initiatives or processes, next week, GCOM, and the next month, we will have internal coordination with the Global Task Force. In April, we will have a special emphasis on the Earth Day. The Urban 7 Summit Mayor Summit will be in March, and Urban 20 Mayor Summit will be in July in Tokyo and Ahmedabad, respectively. Daring cities will be in Bonn in July, as very similar to the Brussels Urban Summit with Metropolis and a number of other our European networks. And that is also the point. This was related to also the discussion on the regional climate weeks. Let's remember, regional climate weeks are always taking place in the global south. And I think it's time for us to challenge or invite or encourage the UNFCCC to start considering convening regional climate weeks in the global north. And in fact, the fact that regional climate weeks have happened in the regional level, at the regional level, is one of the things that helped to support the global south to be more actively involved in the Paris Agreement. So if we have officially negotiated or agreed regional climate weeks in the US, in the EU, I think it will also help our members there. So let's aim for that in the next year or in this year already. And I know, for example, Committee of the Regions was very eager to focus on that. We can discuss with our colleagues in the Brussels Urban Summit, and we can also discuss it with our colleagues who are hosting the Cities Summit of Americas. In June, we also have MetCop, again, another example of a regional initiative. And more importantly, we will try to focus on Earth Day and Stocktake as well throughout the year. And with this, I think under this condition, we have to think about our priorities. We believe the first priority is to make operationalization of surge, because it's been really an important model. We would like this to roll out, that it is not forgotten by the next presidency or by other partners. Especially, we'll try to make use of the UN Habitat Assembly, but we want to make sure, especially the national ownership in the steering committee, in the implementation models. And we also would like to make sure a better synergy between the initiatives of the champions and this initiative by the presidency, so that they help each other. They make more synergetic approaches. And we will discuss with UN Habitat, because as we have heard, COP27 presidency has primarily asked UN Habitat to lead that. ICLE has been in the secretariat of this process, but we will have to see how UN Habitat and COP27 presidency will advance in this process. So other than that, the stocktake process will be an important point. I will go to this in the next slide. And the third point is that we really have to think of COP as not the goal itself, especially with the conclusion of the whole design. Of course, we will focus on loss and damage, but we have to make sure that throughout the year, we focus on our implementation. We have to participate all the UNFCCC agenda, so that the COP is just a result of our yearly engagement. That's a very crucial issue that we have to really think more professionally and more systematically from the beginning of the COP. And coming back, I know it's really we're stressed with the time, but this is actually my last slide. This global stocktake is really very important. We have made use of the Talanoa dialogues as a big momentum. When we hosted Talanoa dialogues, there were no meaningful NDCs. Now there are seriously good NDCs, and it could be even better. It should be even better. When we were in the Talanoa dialogues, we didn't have race to zero, race to resilience, or even urban commitments or climate emergency declarations. Now we have them. At the never had this discussion on climate justice. It was not a priority. We have to address this now. The goal would be that every city hall could turn into a venue for stocktake. And if we can have a good number of representative models from North and South during Earth Day, this could be helpful for us so that we can feed into the technical dialogue session in June, and outcomes, the UNFCCC is that the real global political stocktake will be in Dubai. But if we can make use of the time between June and October, that could be a fantastic opportunity. This could be the time we can start the political process at home, and we can make sure parties feel the pressure from their citizens and their local governments before they come to Dubai, so that their decisions are much more informed in Dubai. That is the whole purpose. We will get back to you again in a couple of days' time about a model of like an open process to ask expressions from cities and regions that the city halls or the regional governments or local governments express their intent to convene, and the LGMA partners could serve to support them and participate in this process, but it's primarily relying on the local and regional governments across the world. This can give us a huge new way of mobilization. We can really turn every local and regional global stocktake process for a momentum for climate emergency globally, and it could turn into a mini COP at the local and regional level, which could create an unprecedented momentum if it is well designed. Let's make sure that this will be our biggest agenda this year. As I said, we will get back to all of you, and we will be eager to hear your suggestions, but it is really the time to make sure that is a new momentum for climate emergency is kicked off, especially in these difficult times when we are discussing the impacts of wars, when we're discussing the increased influence of the global oil and gas lobbying, and they are much more powerful because they gained huge profits during this year. We have to use additional innovative ideas to make sure the renewable energy, the climate justice community is much more stronger at the local, regional, and national level, so that at the global process, we are stronger with the outcomes. With this, I would like to conclude. I know only 7 minutes are left, but I'm very happy to see all these inputs into the chat box. I see Felix mentioning about the midterm review of Sendai framework. We have a broader agenda, Felix, but I think these are the ones that we will particularly pay attention, and we'll see how the connection will come back. And this Food System Summit stock taking, let's see who would be hosting this, and we will try to follow as much as possible. I am happy if you wish, Felix or Andrew, you can intervene, or others, especially after hearing all these inputs. Now, yes, chat box is open. Felix already has inserted, and I see one hand raised. Felix, please take the floor.
Thank you. I put the Sendai information up for two reasons. One is that governments have produced their national reports, and those who are from particular countries may want to see if their country has done a national report. And as you're talking about loss and damage, this will be a big part of the Sendai review. They're expanding the way they're looking at it. And they have a very interesting paper on financing loss and damage coming out. It's not yet out. There'll be a synthesis report of the national reports presented at the UN on the 14th of February. So if you're not thinking of going out for Valentine's Day and want to stay in and watch the Sendai review of that, then you've got a sad life, a bit like me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Felix, especially making this connection of the importance of Sendai and Los Angeles. That was a very valid point to really consider this more seriously. I know we will continue to stay in touch with our colleagues from Scottish government, especially so that we can build on their proposals, but this was a very well recognized point. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Just a quick question, and I know that LGMA has to prioritize, and I fully agree with that. I was curious, Yunus, do you have the impression regarding the high-level political forum triennial review of SDG 11 in July in New York, do you think climate issues will play much of a role in that? Do you foresee the LGMA being involved, or is that not one of the top venues for us?
Well, I think we can justify, especially saying that in the climate, I mean, we can build the logic that SDG 11 implementation is primarily monitored by UN Habitat. And in this year, over these, I mean, you remember there was another SDG 11 review, I think it was in 2019. So we can easily make the linkage saying that between these 3 years, one of the biggest progress is that the urban agenda has become much more incorporated into the climate agenda. I think that could be one way of building the bridge. And that exactly depends on, because there will be also this UN Habitat Assembly in June in Nairobi. So we can make the logic. But of course, this year, as you have noticed, there's also the SDG Summit, which is heads of state level in September, which will also coincide or follow each other with the Climate Action Summit of the Secretary General. So in fact, I don't see any reason why climate will still not become a priority topic. So therefore, we should make use of all the efforts in our hands to make sure there is a debate on climate action in both July, ECOSOC-led HLPF, but also at the UN General Assembly-led Heads of State Summit of the SDGs as well, and look forward to your contributions in that regard as well as Climate Heritage Network, ICOMOS, of course. Andrew, it's always a pleasure to have your leadership there.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
3 more minutes left. Any additional burning points? I see colleagues have shared the links there. That's good that we can follow up later on, especially in the chat Q&A box. You can see the link for the Sendai framework, as well as the English Al Arabiya newsletter. Andrew, maybe you can summarize, because I may not be grasping immediately what has been in the announcement of Saudi Arabia. Can you summarize it?
Well, I don't have any inside information, but during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, it was in the press that Saudi Arabia had been selected to host MENA Climate Week. So
when was this announced?
Well, it was just in the, if you Google it, you'll find articles. I included one of them in the chat, but maybe I'm confused.
Well, according to this, of course, this says that MENA Climate Week 2023, that was November. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, back in Sharm el-Sheikh in the COP, during the COP, it was announced, but I haven't heard any more about it. So I don't know. I had the impression that maybe MENA Climate Week will be important because it's in the same region as the, same locality as the COP. UAE.
I mean, theoretically, yes, of course, there's a huge relevance or important linkage. I know Saudi Arabia will also be hosting the desertification COP. I think it would be 2 years later, which is 2024. Okay. Felix shares his Friends of Governance linkage, where there is also a list of events. Obviously, as I said, we have also benefit from your compilation, Felix, and I'm sure you're using also the inputs or in intelligence or information from ours, so that we help each other. There's of course a huge wider agenda as well, but let's see how this will be helping each other. Just again, a key issue, we'll try to make sure that's a bit more easily communicated, but we would recommend, especially all the LGMA colleagues, to prioritize once again how they can help their members to convene a Stocktake at their jurisdiction. I think that will be a huge priority this year. On top, of course, we will follow the others, and we will wait for updates from UN Habitat and Presidency for the surge. But I think we have to make sure Stocktake is delivering this power of multi-level action, because it's exactly what we have asked, and we have to demonstrate that that is possible. Okay, I suggest we announce that this session is coming to a close. I appreciate all your support, input, and contributions, and I wish you a nice day, evening. And let's stay in touch, and thank you once again to all of you.